Movies like 10 Things I Hate About You, Pride and Prejudice, and Clueless are all cult classics, but they all share a trope that has become so popular, especially since the 2010s, and has blown up both the literary and the film scene. Now, what trope is this, you may ask? Of course, it's enemies to lovers. Now, if you don't know what enemies to lovers is, and you couldn't guess from the very obvious name, it is when characters meet, they have a less than pleasant relationship, and then they ultimately realize they are the ones for each other. And although it might seem quite trivial of a trope, it's actually quite a deep and complex trope that a lot of people really love and a lot of people seek out when they're trying to read a book or watch a movie. And you might be wondering, why is it so popular? Why do people love it? Why is 10 Things I Hate About You the best love movie that's ever been made? Well, today, I'm going to be telling you about it. I'm going to be telling you about why this is such an attractive trope and why so many people love it and why I love it. And also, if you say, I look like the girl from Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in the comments, I know. This cut and this fleece, I already know. And I do look like Sue from Glee a little bit. But thank you very much, I already know. Okay? Let's get into it. So when I looked for the discourse on this online, I saw a lot of people saying the same thing, and that was, I don't really like romance movies, but there's something about enemies to lovers that draws me in, that makes me excited, that makes me feel tension, and that is exactly what we're going to be talking about first. The first reason why this trope is so popular is tension. Not just the tension of will they, won't they, but also the tension of the growth of both of them personally. When you're enemies to lovers, unlike when you're friends to lovers, there is no excuse for you to be around each other. So there's the tension of time, spending time apart, being time zones apart. There's the tension of distance, not being close to each other, not being able to interact with each other. So when you do interact, when you do have these moments where you're together, and those moments are so precious, passionate, so filled with emotion, it makes the whole story so much more intense. And in movies like Pride and Prejudice, where they suddenly get thrown together in the same area with the same acquaintances, and then they keep finding their way back to each other, sharing these little pockets of emotion fueled by detest sometimes, but mostly it's like an underlying understanding of each other, you can really feel that. And especially when it gets portrayed into literature and movies, it can be described in a way that is so intense that you can really find yourself in that situation, and you can really find yourself on that emotional roller coaster where sometimes they're screaming at each other, they hate each other, but sometimes they are sharing these longing glances and these little touches, and you think, wow, if you really were someone that they didn't like, they wouldn't be doing that. So you get yourself built up, you feel this kind of underlying tension, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, and that really draws in a lot of people. So when we're talking about enemies to lovers, tension is so important. Not only does it build up the characters, the setting, the plot itself, but it is the underlying basis of their entire relationship. Even when they decide to become lovers, tension is what grew from their meeting, and it's beautiful. And moving on to not just tension, but the actual understanding of enemies to lovers is that if they didn't respect each other, if they didn't respect each other's minds, if they didn't think that there was some strange connection pulling them together, they would not be enemies. They consider themselves enemies because they understand that in many ways they're alike, but in many ways they might be different. And especially in movies like 10 Things I Hate About You, they are so similar in their outlook on the world, how they interact with people, and it's just their circumstance that make them enemies. They're not even really enemies, they're just strangers. And when they build this relationship, when they build this trust, and then the plot twist happens where she finds out he's, secretly being paid to take her out, you feel such a crumbling distress, because even though, regardless of this situation that he finds himself in, you can tell that he has real actual feelings for her. So you want them to be together, you want to root for them, but it's this tension, again, it's this tension of this underlining problem that is not made aware to the main character herself, but it's this underlying problem that we know has to be addressed at some point in the movie. So you feel so much tension between that. Will they, won't they, will she forgive him when she initially finds out? And it's harder because we know that the confession is coming. We know that she will find out in some way. And if it's not from him, it's even worse. And when it's not from him, you really think, oh no, how can they mend this relationship? But you realize that when they decide to be together, the tension feels like it's reached a climax, and it's just such a satisfying feeling. And don't get me wrong, there is a lot of problematic things that come with this tension. For example, when you do have movies like 10 Things I Hate About You, and especially the movie After, even though the books delve into it a little bit more, when you do have a scenario where enemies to lovers, they do find each other, they do start to develop more of a positive relationship, and then there's a plot twist like in the movie After, where there's a dare, where he's dared to fall in love with her. Even in the books, it's a lot more gruesome than that. If you want to find out about that, Mila Tequila did a great video about the After books to movies differences. You should definitely check it out. But apart from that, in 10 Things I Hate About You, when she finds out about the deal that is made where he takes her out for money, that is obviously very problematic. And one of the big problems for enemies to lovers is that a lot of the time it's misconstrued as their passionate hate for each other is what they are misunderstanding as love. So a lot of people have said online that they don't like movies like that because it builds up an unrealistic version of love, and also it's a very toxic version because they are seeing themselves, they obviously have this tension between each other, but is that healthy tension where they're in love, or is it most likely detest for each other, or feeling challenging each other, feeling a sense of competition, and they've misunderstood that later on as romantic feelings? And a lot of people that think on that side don't really like the genre. A lot of people that can see more of an unspoken connection that they've decided to develop into a romantic one, a lot of people like it for that reason. So depending on how your outlook on the genre is, we'll determine how you like the movies, basically. Moving on to the main reason why people love this kind of trope itself is just how unrealistic it is. I mean, in real life, you are not falling in love with people you don't like. You're not falling in love with your enemy, whether that's your academic enemy, competition, whether that's someone in your workplace that you don't really like. You're not really going to fall in love with them. That's not how human emotion works. But it's really nice in a book or film setting to explore unrealistic tropes, you know, like when people love the fantasy genre, when people love enemies to lovers, when it comes to things like friends to lovers, that's such a realistic trope in real life, and that's such a realistic thing that happens. A lot of couples start off as friends and then develop into something more. So when people view that, they don't really get a sense of satisfaction out of it because they see that every day in their everyday lives. Their friends met through work, their friends met through other friends, and now they become a couple. They see that, they experience that, but they don't experience Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet. They don't experience people that are trying to keep apart from each other, but they just get pulled in. Because in real life, if you can't be together in a healthy way, in a productive way, that's because there's something wrong in the relationship. Like, if you have to stay away from each other because you just can't help being pulled back in, but you know it's bad for you, that's what we call toxic. That is what we call toxic. But in these books, it's portrayed as like, why are they keeping themselves apart from each other? What is this unspoken hate or unspoken disagreement they both have for each other? I don't want to say they hate each other because enemy doesn't have to mean they hate each other, but it is portrayed a lot that they have a big dislike for each other in these movies. And then suddenly one day they just decide to forget it. In movies like Anyone But You, the new Sydney Sweeney movie, it's portrayed a lot more as a misunderstanding, like she liked him, he said something bad to his friend while she was listening, it was a misunderstanding, he thought she'd abandoned him, they both have very underlying issues, and then the movie is them determining that it's a misunderstanding, but they've already developed these negative feelings for each other, and in this trope, in movies like this, it is a lot of them finding themselves in a fake scenario. So like pretending to date, pretending to do this, and then actually falling in love in that situation. I quite enjoy that side of it. It's like a little game, like a little video game, like a little challenge, but that is a very common concept in this genre. And a lot of these characters call themselves enemies, identify as enemies, because they are challenging each other's convictions and morals. Like I said earlier, they're so similar in how they view the world and view life that they actually butt heads a lot, because they are challenging each other to be better versions of themselves. They're calling out behavior that they find toxic, and when they do that, it's human nature to feel defensive, to feel like this person doesn't like me, to feel like, on a path of having to prove yourself. And this really delays the type of relationship they will eventually get into. And what it does from a movie standpoint, from a book standpoint, it means you can get a lot more content out of it. Because unlike friends to lovers, where they're comfortable with each other, they know that they have things in common, it's a really small step to crossing that emotional boundary. But with enemies to lovers, you can drag it out for so long, you can keep their timeline so far apart, because they would have no reason to interact with each other, because they don't like each other, or they find each other competition in some way. And that means you can get much more content out of your book, much more content out of your movie. You can build tension, keyword, and it is a lot more exciting for the viewer, because not only do you have to wait a while for them eventually to get together, but you start to pick up little bits and pieces. This is more so true in book terms, because, in movies, you can show the longing glance, you can show the light touches a lot more effectively. When you write it in books, it does come across much more black and white, like she glanced at him, and it's a lot less nuance than it is in movies. You can tell very obviously, very quickly in movies that they're trying to spin this enemies to lover trope, but in books, the interactions that they have can be completely platonic and even hostile, standoffish, until one of them suddenly declares their love for the other one. It's super intense when you read it from a book standpoint, but when you watch it in a movie, it's a little bit more obvious. Now, it's really smart for authors to do this, because obviously it's more monetary gain. They can release more books, they can make more parts to a series, because people will be clung on, waiting for that final chance for their two favourite characters to get together. But also, from a movie standpoint, it's a really lucrative trope to play into, because there's so many different variations you can do with it, so many different timelines. Enemies to lovers is such a universal experience that it can be done in any country, at any timeline, for any reason. There can be any matter of, combinations of plot, and it's just a really lucrative one to make a movie out of. For example, the After movies. Was the plot the best thing that's ever been written? Absolutely not. Was the writing of the movie the best that's ever been written? I would say the opposite. But do they have, 5 movies now? Yes, they absolutely do. Why? Because people love enemies to lovers. And even though the movie After, they became lovers in the first movie, they go in and out of enemies to lovers, enemies to lovers, enemies to lovers. And people are so addicted to that theme, people are so addicted to the chase, to the tension, that it can span out a whole series. It's just incredible. And the thing is, why movies like After aren't so successful is because when they introduce the lover too early, they miss a lot of the tension, and the tension is different. It's a toxic kind of tension where they're attracted to each other now, and they've been together, so that now it's just a toxic relationship. But when they are starting off as enemies, up until the point of being lovers, it's then like will they, won't they, kind of like spicy tension, you know? And that's what a lot of people like, especially people that have been in relationships for a long time where they might not feel that kind of tension with their partner anymore, or people that are single and there are people in their life that they don't like, and they can imagine this crazy scenario where we suddenly just start looking at each other and finding each other in different situations. Which is what, you know, a lot of people like, and I can't say that I don't like it too. I'm a human. People that like this genre like the chase, they like the tension, they don't want it maybe for themselves in real life, but they like watching people vicariously through characters go through the situation. That's why people love enemies to lovers so much. Why can't people understand that? It's not real, it's fantasy. Just in the same way people love werewolves, witches, vampires. Why do you think Twilight was so successful? Because they're two people that would have never met under circumstances, that would have never been together, but they can't seem to stay away from each other. And that is a primal thing, I think, in humans, where like your hormones, your inner like animal, excuse the phrasing, people like that idea that even though logically in my brain I know I should stay away from this person, even though logically in my brain I know this person is not the kind of person that I would get along with romantically or socially, just something about the person draws you to them. Now the problem with this is, and a lot of criticism that people have online, is that a lot of this might be based on physical attraction and being physically attracted to the person, which is why I think it would be great to have this kind of enemies to lovers movie where they can't see each other. I'm talking love letters, I'm talking email addresses, I'm talking something. I want a movie where they fall in love purely from each other's handwriting. Where are movies like that? Can someone direct me to a movie that's purely about falling in love with someone for their cursive handwriting? Because that's a movie I would make, that's a movie I would love, and that is something that would definitely work on me. So please point me in that direction. Thank you so much. Last thing I want to talk about today is the type of movies that try and take in the enemies to lovers trope, but they're not so successful about it, and that is so clearly shown in a movie like Me Before You, because Me Before You is a great movie, right? It's a great movie, but it's also a movie that's very different to the normal enemies to lovers tropes because enemies to lovers is such an emotional roller coaster. It's so much tension, it's so much will they, won't they, that when we reach the climax, of them becoming lovers, it's such a satisfying feeling that it feels like an end feeling, you know? Like, you can build up their relationship, you can build up the tension over books, movies, years and years of time. But if they become lovers, they stay lovers. Unlike the movie After, unlike Me Before You, when you don't make them lovers, don't make them endgame, do you know how many people have watched the unreleased scene from Pride and Prejudice that wasn't featured in the actual release, but it was featured in extended versions of the DVD? If you haven't seen it, go watch it on YouTube. It makes such a satisfying bow on the present that is Pride and Prejudice, because it's such an in-your-face declaration of love and such an in-your-face show of affection that it feels satisfying that I had to sit through so much time of tension. Go watch it if you haven't. But with movies like Me Before You, why it's hard for me to watch is because I love satisfying endings. People love satisfying endings. And when you grow up and when you're spending years going through this one relationship with these two people and seeing their fights and their disputes and their tension, we should get a tension count. See how many times I say the word tension in this movie? See how many times I say tension in this video? Please let me know in the comments. I'll give you a prize if you can tell me how many times I say tension. Let me give you 5 more. Tension. Anyway, Me Before You, obviously not as satisfying ending. Maybe satisfying if you love the character herself and see that she can go on with her life and, you know, experience things that she wouldn't have been able to experience if she hadn't gone through this trauma of losing the person she loves. But from an enemies to lovers standpoint, from a relationship standpoint, when he decides to go through with what he goes through, you feel like a sense of like, not like dissatisfaction, but it's just something you're so not used to. And I understand why people would have some gripes with that, because it's like an emotional deal, right? Okay, I will sit through your years, your months, your pages of emotional tension waiting for these two people to realize they like each other, and then you give me them being in a relationship. And when that doesn't work out sometimes, people feel kind of cheated, but that's just one look, you know? Okay guys, that is my video about why people are obsessed with the enemies to lovers trope. I know I spoke a lot and very quickly. I'm sorry for that, I am a yapper. But yes, if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out my Reddit videos that I've been doing. I've been really enjoying doing Reddit videos recently, so please go check that out. And yeah, again, if you like this video, please give me a like. Subscribe to my channel if you want to hear more from me. Tell me I look like Edna Mode. And that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.